PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R., and with me on this episode is Cheryl Costa, UFO researcher. Cheryl, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Adam?
Good. I'm glad to have you on. Glad to have your time. We'll dive right in.
We booked this thing many months ago before my move, and we had all the packing at our end. I was packing stuff for 3 months, getting ready to go, and then we've been here in the new apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, for a month as of a day ago, and we're about 80% unpacked.
I was just going to complain about the
video because I got a sea of boxes behind me.
Yeah, I was just going to complain about my weather, but where you are, it's freezing.
Where are you at?
I'm in Florida.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, Cleveland got the edge. We got a foot of snow,
right?
But counties south of us got 24 inches of snow.
My God, here in Florida, it's summer in the day and winter at night.
Yes. I was stationed in Florida when I was in the Navy, and I this time of year it would be lovely 60, 70, 80 degree weather, and then after about 8 o'clock at night, it was down to like 20.
Yeah, it's incredible. This state, the weather here is bipolar to say the least.
Right.
So let's talk about this, Cheryl. What got you involved with ufology? What put you on the path?
Well, this is kind of a weird story. I had my first sighting when I was 12 with my mother and father. It was a late August afternoon. We had been visiting an uncle. It was about 3 weeks before we were going back to school, and we were coming down off the hill where his farm was. And it had been a wet season, so the corn was higher than my dad's car, And my mother had my father pull off the dirt road a little bit and stop the car. And I said, "What's going on, Mom?" Of course, I got brother and sister back here that are toddlers under 5. Okay. And I was like 12. And my mom pointed out into the western sky, clear blue sky, parked out there in the western sky. It was parked out there like a rock. There was this there was this silver ball. And to give you an idea how big it was, if you hold your arm out and look at your little fingernail, that's about how big it was from a perception standpoint. And my mom went through the thing. Well, in 65, NASA was only 5 or 6 years old, so she says it might be a weather balloon. It might be the Air Force. It might be something NASA was doing, And then she dropped the big one on me. I never gave him this a thought. She says, it might be people from another planet.
Huh.
And of course, that fascinated the 12-year-old.
Right.
Yeah.
And
so we talked about it, sat there for about 10 minutes discussing it. And my father said, "Let's get going." It wasn't going anywhere. So we got back on the road, got down to the bottom of the hill, turned left to head back to our hometown on the state road, the asphalt state road. And we had a big old Chevy Impala, and those cars back in those days had these huge back windows. I got up there in the back of that window. I'm kind of sitting there, my chin on my fists, so who are you guys? And when it decided to go, it was one of these kind of things.
Just took right off.
I didn't see an effect like it again until like the late 80s, early 90s with one of the early Star Trek movies, where it goes out there and there's kind of a little flash when it, gets off in the distance.
Right.
And I didn't see an effect like that again till 30, 40 years later, and that kind of changes you, a thing like that.
Well, yeah.
Especially at my age. And, remember when we were teens, Mom and Dad are stupid. And so there was this whole thing with my mom and I. Hell, she's just turned 90, and we don't get along on a lot of stuff. Believe me, we really don't. But I could still give her a telephone call and say, "Hey, I got a good UFO story for you," and she would listen.
So that caught her attention as well, then.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She was always good on it. And when I was in junior high and high school. She was. I started going to the library and getting books on this stuff. Back in those days, it was books by guys like Major Keogh and Frank Edwards, guys like that, And these are old time writers on this topic. And it was just about the time the story broke about Betty and Barty Hill. Okay. So it was fascinating. So I would bring home stuff for her to read. She'd find stuff in the magazines and show it to me. And by the time I got, let's say about 11th, 12th, let's say senior in high school. Okay. Von Daniken's book had come out, Chariot of the Gods.
I still haven't read that, and I hear a lot of people tell me to read it.
In 1968 or 69, that was a seminal book. It really was, because a lot of people synced with that idea. Okay, because if you'd been reading the UFO literature up at that point, there would be people who were saying, "Oh, wow, these things are mentioned in the Bible," that kind of stuff, right? And he came along and started asking these questions. In fact, in the book, our UFO books, right? We have a white one and a pink one, right? The original statistics book that we wrote, the white one, back in 2017, he has a copy of that. He has a signed copy. I sent him one, and I got a very lovely letter back from him, and he said he sat down with a pot of tea, and he said he poured through it for 2.5, 3 hours.
Wow.
I was very delighted to hear that. But he made a big point, and he has said this since. He never said these things happened. He asked like 250 questions over the course of the book. What if this happened? What if that happened? Of course, the critics, the church, all these people who had an axe to grind against him, would say, well, he said this, and he didn't say that. He asked a question. He said, "Is this possible? You think this may have been the case?" That kind of thing. But he got slammed by academia and the church, and all the critics just brought out their knives. And of course, back in those days, there was a number of debunkers, guys like Glass and a couple of other people. So it was just ugly. But in our household, the copy of Von Daniken's book was a paperback copy, and Mom dog-eared on the top of the pages. I dog-eared on the bottom. We just about destroyed that book. It was so funny. That was my initiation to this. Now, when I got in the service, I left high school and literally almost immediately went into the Air Force. I think August 20th, 1970 is when I went in the Air Force. Okay, and so I had a little bit of a summer vacation, then I went in the Air Force, and I realized very quickly that to be a member of something like MUFON was frowned upon in those days. It still is to some. Well, I don't know if it is now, but it was very frowned upon at that time. In fact, they had a laundry list of organizations you couldn't be a member of, okay, and keep a security clearance, and that was an issue. So I kept my mouth shut about it. Okay. And I had a substantial sighting about a year later. It was Christmas Eve, 1971. I was in Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam. Okay. And a friend of mine and I decided to go down to, now, please understand, at the time, I had been raised Catholic, but I hadn't gone to Mass since I was 17.
Same.
Okay. So I come from, I'm going to say this because but even though I don't want to get into a big mystical talk, but my family on one side of the family is clairvoyant. Okay.
Right.
And on my father's side of the family, we descend from Berber, North African Berber shaman. Okay. And the joke we used to have, people, I used to say I descend from Portuguese and Moorish pirates, and it was the truth. I had an ancestry done, and by golly, it was right there, But the bottom line was, I had to keep it to myself. Well, this friend of mine and I decided to go down to midnight mass for something to do. It was tradition on Christmas Eve, right? So we're walking down to the base chapel, and Cam Ranh Bay, Vietnam think of it sort of like Virginia Beach. It's a big sandbar peninsula. Okay. And everybody thinks when they think Vietnam, they're thinking jungles and rice paddies and things. No, this was the biggest peninsula sandbar thing you've ever seen. So essentially, we went to kind of like a desert survival training instead of jungle school because it was all sand where we were. Okay. And so we're walking down to the base chapel, and it was one of those nights where a gazillion stars in the sky kind of thing, the galaxy was up there and all that. So we're walking along and we both see this streak going across the sky. And I just said, jet, and then it stops. And my friend, he says, Cheryl, Carl, what's his name? Boy Cheryl in those days. Let's say it that way. Boy Cheryl. He says, jets don't stop.
No.
And I said, yeah, and helicopters don't fly that fast.
And I'm looking at Cameron Bay on Google Maps, and you got a bird's eye view of every direction from there.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. When you said peninsula, I mean, it's basically sandbars.
It is. And it was one of the largest Air Force bases in the country. And we had what they called the tri-service ammo dump. We had the ammo because it was a port. It was a Cameron Bay. It was a bay. So we had port shipping right there. Okay. And we had the largest, in fact, they told us it was like the second largest ammunition dump on the planet.
Huh.
And about a month later, sappers managed to get in there and plant a satchel charge and a rack of 500-pound bombs. And these things were going off for 18 hours. And none of us could hear. Our ears were ringing for 3 weeks afterwards, But the deal was, we sat there and looked at this thing. And then I said, it stopped. I said, I've done a lot of reading on this stuff. If that's what I think it is, it's going to start dancing around like a fairy. And darned if it didn't. Type of thing, and then took off again. So me and my friend Tom got down to midnight mass. Believe me, our minds were not on midnight mass.
No, I wouldn't imagine. I mean, here's what a lot of things I've been researching, and when I hear about them dancing around the way they're doing, I don't believe that they're doing that to show off. I think when they start to use their propulsion, they're manipulating space matter around them. And I think that's what we're seeing. That's not exactly what they're doing. Especially when you listen to the reports of the pilots, the way they're moving very erratically. Yep. It seems like when they start using a higher standard of performance, when they distort the space around them, I think it deceives what it is we're seeing. Right?
All the Newtonian physics goes out the window.
Right.
So no, I would agree. Back then I couldn't have agreed with you, but now my training when I was in the Navy, I was in the Air Force and I served it later in the Navy. And my training in the Navy initially was in nuclear power. And I ended up having a much better education in physics than I ever dreamed. And what we know to be this dancing around, I would agree with you 100%. They are distorting time space there, and like I said, the normal laws of physics don't apply.
Right, and we're not capable of perceiving in it real time what it is it's actually doing.
I would agree.
Yes, I mean, I come from no science background. I witnessed nothing myself. I decided when I was going to start doing the podcast and researching this, I was going to really look at this from every possible angle because I doubt nothing. I don't know enough to doubt anything.
Yeah.
But when I hear about the fantastic maneuvers, I have to believe that we're perceiving something that's not actually happening because for them to manipulate the space around them, whatever it is they're doing, I think it's fooling us to see something we otherwise wouldn't notice.
I wouldn't disagree. No, I wouldn't disagree at all. They talk about being able to make these huge, quick turns at speeds that would homogenize a human.
Right.
Again, it's perception.
Did you ever see the movie?
No, they're just doing a very gentle turn, but because they've changed the curvature of the local space,
yeah, they distorted it.
May look to us like they have shot off like a bullet,
Right.
And it's again, most people don't understand the physics there, but I agree that they're doing something really amazing with the physics. And I once saw some videos, and if you have the right video or the right film footage of one, when it decides to wink out like that, there's about a 2.5 to 3 frame distortion. You can still see it, but it looks like, I don't know if you were, I don't know how old you are.
I'm 43.
Okay, then you probably remember having maybe a television set on an antenna.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you remember how sometimes if you're on the fringe of a thunderstorm, the screen would sometimes you'd be looking at the picture, and sometimes the screen was sort of half white out.
Yeah.
With static. Okay.
You could exhibit that with magnets on today's flat TVs, by the way. So that's another distortion of an image, right?
Yeah. Well, here's what happens with that. I saw some footage back in the late 80s. Now, a lot of people blow off our guy over in Switzerland, Billy Muir. Okay. I wrote I wrote newspaper articles for 7 years for the Syracuse New Times about nothing but UFOs. Okay.
Right.
In fact, my entire collection of UFO articles, 238 of them, are in a book available on Amazon. If you go into the book search section, put in Cheryl Costa, Cheryl with a C, Costa with a C, and pull up and put UFO after the name, you'll see 3 or 4 books there written by me.
And I'm going to put that in description too, links so people can find it.
Do that. If you go into the book search section of Amazon and then put in like Cheryl Costa UFO, you'll get the 3 books that we wrote. And you got the 2 statistics books, UFO Sightings Desk Reference. Okay. And there's 2 of them, the white book and the pink book. Make sure you ask me why it's a pink book. You'll love the story.
Yeah, why is it the pink book? That's got my attention when you said it earlier. Why the pink book?
Just let me finish the thought.
Yeah.
When I was looking at some video, a friend of mine had all these videotapes, Billy Muir videotapes, and videotape of film that he shot. Okay, remember, this is a one-armed Swiss guy. Okay, and whenever one of these supposed Palladium beam ships were getting ready to like wink out or take off like a bullet, there was a momentary flash. Most people don't see it, but I was a video editor, and my eyeball was sort of trained to being able to see down almost the frame rate type of thing. And I saw that, and I put that videotape into my VHS video editor. I used to make documentaries, and I sat there and cranked it frame by frame. And on video, it was about 2 full frames and a field. There's 2 fields per frame, so I had about 5 fields worth of this sort of, not a complete whiteout, but there was this whiting out around the edges. Okay.
Right.
And I started looking at all the tapes that this friend of mine had in his library. Some of them were film, and you could see it on film. 2 frames worth of film. Film frames are at a different rate than video. And it was 2 frames in film. Okay. And I said, wow, there's a smoking gun. Now, I wrote an article about this back, I'm going to say around 2017, maybe. And I had every debunker you can think of hammering me for weeks in email and on Facebook.
Isn't that a weird thing when someone approaches you with science for something they can't prove or disprove themselves?
Well, the part of the problem was for weeks, I kept getting all these people who thought they was a better debunker than the last guy that came after me.
God, it seems like it's like a long laundry list of bullies. Because that, to me, what a debunker is.
It was.
Debunkers, if you want to debunk something, and I hate even using the word debunk, if you want to disprove something, do the homework. Don't just have an instant reply with your thoughts. Spend a couple years researching what it is you're seeing before opening a statement. Because at the end of the day, you're another social internet bully. That's what I think they are, bullies.
And some of them do the proverbial notch on their gun, kind of thing with people that they try to take down. Well, one of the arguments that I made in my newspaper article was that because they kept trying to write it off and saying, if he was shooting with these old style video cameras, if he put it on pause for a moment and then released it, you would get a burst, you would get a distorted video. Okay. That was the best story they could come up with. Okay. And the point I kept making to him is this: at the time I said, I'm a trained filmmaker. I'm a trained videographer. I know what those kinds of cameras can and cannot do. Do not sit here and tell me this. But the thing that bothered them was, that piece of space shuttle footage where it looks like somebody shoots up like a laser beam up in them and the thing kind of just gets off.
All right. So I'm glad you said that. I had never seen that video till recently. And you're talking about when it's in space and it goes about maybe 74 degrees the opposite direction and something fired.
Yeah. That's the one.
That actually captured my attention, by the way.
If you were to slow the video down,
right,
you will see that 2.5 frame of whiteness. They literally changed the physics of time space
around them.
Yeah. Now, in local, what I'm going to call local space too, So give me an example. Excuse me. Supper's biting back here. In high school, there was like a physics experiment where you had to slit and you put a beam of light through that slit and you got these things.
It was to show how light travels.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that.
If you put two slots in there, you'll get a couple of other slots,
right?
Okay, up here, and there's more slots than there should be.
A long time ago, they were trying to do that to prove whether it was a particle or a wave, and it turned out to be both.
Yeah, it's a wavicle. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So it's crazy. So, but also part of it is that see the 19th century explanation to the dark spots was that there was an interference pattern and it was nulling out the other thing. But if you talk to the high physicists, they'll explain to you that those photons are getting lost in other universes.
It's true, because if there's a study showing how atoms react here as they act across the universe, it's almost like a collective consciousness, right?
They're all connected.
Yeah.
They're all connected. Every single atom in your body is connected to every other single atom everywhere in the bloody universe.
And this is why I go with my theory. I have this theory about when I speak to people about afterlife and what happens when we die.
Thank you.
I reference the cosmic web because I see the connection to that. And it reminds me of fiber optic cables. And I think when you die here, and I think Earth is a proving ground for a lot of reasons, depending on how you are here, is if you get recycled or you goes to the next level, depending on, what you did here in the proving grounds. That being said, when I first heard about atoms reacting to one another from across the vastness of space, at some point you have to kind of acknowledge the idea that there's an architect, and this is one large connected thing.
Yep.
And and the only reason we don't accept it or acknowledge it is because we're not capable of perceiving it.
Now you sound like me and my yogi friends. Well, the bottom line with this whole thing with Billy Muir, and I want to wrap that up. The deal there was I saw that on that particular STS footage, and I pointed at that, and the debunkers were, they couldn't argue. And then they brought out the big guns. Oh no, Cheryl, it's got to be a problem with the camera he was shooting with.
No way. That was very fluid. I watched that video slowly because I was the first time I watched it. That was very fluid. I didn't see any manipulations of it. You could certainly tell that the camera didn't go on or off.
He didn't pause that video.
Right. Yeah, it was very fluid.
Like I said, I played the thing a frame at a time in my video editor. Okay, which I was capable of doing. I could go right down to the frame rate. Field 1, and you go watch field 1, field 2, and there's your frame. I'd watch each one paint. And no, there was nothing done. There was no manipulation of that video. It was there for that measured amount of time. Every time I looked at one of those pieces of footage, a piece of video or film on the video, the measurement was the same. And I must have measured 8 or 9 of them. Okay, because a friend of mine had a really good collection of Billy's stuff that was all done through that kernel, whatever. But then this one guy, I mentioned that colonel. I can't remember the guy's name. That was behind Billy 100%. And the first, this one debunker got on me. He's, oh yeah, but he's a child molester. I says, you have nothing else to say about a retired Air Force colonel that to debase him, you have to accuse him of something. He's dead, and he can't argue back. You know, I get very sick of this crap.
A lot of that is, Cheryl, you got to understand, these are people that are questioning not just their beliefs, but their mortality. And they're very content in stating stating the idea that, well, you know, God, and they're not willing to expand or evolve in their thoughts. And an example, even in that video, the OT, like I'm looking at the video now, referencing the planet, there's no pause there because nothing other than that flash and other than that thing turning, everything else is very fluid.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be an expert to notice that. You know, that's the sad part. So,
and the funny thing is, you see that thing coming up from the planet, somebody shot a particle beam at them.
Listen, that's not impossible. And I'll tell you why. If you ever watched the show Future Weapons from like the early 2000s, and this is from and so imagine in the early 2000s, they have a show talking about their high energy lasers, their audio weapons. That's in the early 2000s. They're talking about on a TV show. How many decades prior to that was that something that they were practicing for whatever reason?
I saw an interview with somebody from DARPA or someplace a couple of years ago, and some reporter asked him, could we develop particle weapons? And he just simply said, they've been developed as far as the physics will allow.
You know,
and it went right over the reporter's head, but I knew immediately what he said. Yeah, we've had it a long time.
This is where people fall short in their observation of things. So here's an example: the touch phones we use today, right? Mm-hmm. Now look back in the 90s, before we even had long before a smartphone. John Madden was using a little screen to do that very thing, to highlight things. He was touching it. You could see him touching it. In the earlier 2000s, it got more sophisticated and smaller. But so the point I make with that is touch screens, the things that we think are phenomenal and that they came around in the 2010s, this has been around a long time. GPS has been around a long time. The internet's been around a long time. It's just
let's talk about GPS for a second.
Sure.
I knew a bunch. I used to be a member of Toastmasters. Do you know what that is?
No, I'm not familiar.
Toastmasters is think of it as a club. Anybody can join. Okay, for a few bucks, and they meet like once a month, usually at a restaurant. And you get a bite to eat while you're there, and they practice giving each other speeches. And they have a training book for it, things like this. I was through the training program twice. I did once as Guy Cheryl, and I did it again later as Cheryl. Okay.
Right.
And so both of us had our certified Toastmaster certificate, you know, and the deal there is you learn how to really give good presentations without a lot of ahs and ums kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. And you get to be a very good extemporaneous speaker as well as being able to write structured speeches. Well, we were in this. A couple of the guys that were in our group. I was in the Manassas, Virginia club at the time. And a couple of them worked for the Defense Mapping Agency. And one of the guys did talk about how everybody in his organization's been running around like squirrels for the last 10 years, mapping everything on the planet. Okay. Huh. It was because they were bringing the GPS system up. This is in the mid to late 80s. It wasn't fully up online till like 1990.
Right.
Okay. But they had pieces of it up and running. Okay. And it was amazing. In fact, when we started the first Gulf War,
I was just going to say that's where
some of the Army guys, the military didn't have enough of them, and different squads of Army guys and troops, platoons and things like that, would all throw in money together, and they'd go to some a boat supplier. Okay, a marine supplier, and buy a commercial GPS unit because they were available. They were the size of a lunchbox at the time, but they were able to use those, in the battlefield. And but we're off the topic. But people get an idea that some of this technology is like like in the last 10 years, and that's not the case.
If you look at that Gulf War, we in 1991, you got to see what GPS, why it was there. So far, here's what I've learned. Every single thing that we have today as a luxury was yesterday's military application.
Oh yeah.
And that's just how it comes. So what, I mean, it's effective for the military. Then they have to think of how we're going to use this for a general market to make some money on it. That's what that's what I'm learning. So by that being said, for these debunkers that look at these videos and see these things distorting space-time and are moving differently, you're thinking in terms of what you know now.
Yeah, thank you.
And you can't do that because again, look at the FA-22 Raptor. That was a working project in the late 80s. And then prior to that in the 50s, you had the stealth program coming together and that evolved from the SR-71 Blackbird, right? Because it had a really slim profile. It was designed to evade radar. So people they have to really, and I do this a lot. I always take a step back and think, well, what would I do if I'm a species and I'm observing human beings? Sure, when I start seeing them go to space, that's got my attention. I want to watch this. So are we going to see our president? Sure. When I see them blowing each other up with the power of the sun, I'm going to watch this. Let's see how this unfolds. I don't particularly think that the race that's watching us or the beings that are watching us, I don't think they're motivated to save the planet like people might think. I think actually, when you go back into the 80s, we had a couple of events. We damn near had nuclear war. Right.
Okay. And they stopped it.
I'll tell you why.
They turned off the system.
Yeah,
they shut down the missiles.
And I'll get to why that is, because here's how this is their attitude. And again, this is what humans would do. Let's say you and I, Cheryl, we're out in Africa, we're studying this lion pride. And they went from using claws and teeth, and now they're going to obliterate one another. That's where we get involved. And not because we want to save Africa, because now our study's going to be done. If we don't stop this, we're not going to be able to study how they evolve. We got to stop this so we could further research them.
Well, it's slightly different than that. Okay, they had been studying us since biblical times or before biblical times.
Right.
Okay, they had been watching us, studying us. Hell, they look at the African art. Okay,
yeah.
That's what the fossil record says we all came out of Africa. Look at the African art, and it looks an awful lot like some of the species we talk about.
Well, okay? I mean, look at the Sumerians.
Exactly.
That's crazy. Their star chart is crazy. They knew about planets that we didn't learn about till the 1800s, and even then weren't even sure about it.
Well, the funny thing about all of that is suddenly, the amount of sightings we had was minimal. Then in 1945, we blow 3 nukes.
Yeah.
Okay. By 1947, 2 years, basically about a year and a half to 2 years later, we are inundated with UFO sightings. Okay, there was the great 1947 wave from middle of June to the end of July. Over 900 sightings reported, and that doesn't count the ones that weren't reported.
Yeah, okay. I think if it's a higher intelligence and we're their study, which my personal belief is that we're under long-term study.
Let me hold your thought for a moment.
Sure, go ahead.
So think of it this way: those primitives have a box of matches.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
The children have a box of matches.
Well, here, I'll give you to you like this too. So I said this a lot in the show a lot. We're in a park, right? You and I are walking, and we stumble across an ant colony, and we look down and they're using combustion engine cars. They're flying planes or having primitive war. We're going to lock that park. That park's done. It's locked off. We're watching that colony we're going to watch them evolve, right? And after years of study, one day in a square 1 foot, which to scale for us as a city, but a square 1 foot, we see this explosion that's absolutely devastating. And we're going to be like, holy shit, what are they doing? And it's going to have our full attention, right? Like they finally got to the point where they're using the power of the sun and that. And then are they ready for the next steps of energy? I think their intervention plays a role there. Because we would definitely study the ants as long as possible to watch how they evolve.
Yeah, agreed. I think one of the things remember, we've almost been invaded a couple of times, like Nuremberg 1561, that type of thing.
Right.
And somebody was looking out for us. There's somebody who's overseeing making sure we don't get taken over. Okay,
Right.
because we don't have the technology to compete. Okay, and we still don't have the technology to compete. And I think that's where people have to keep in mind that we have guardians. Somebody is looking out for you. You want to call it the Galactic Federation, whatever you want to call it, but somebody's been looking out for us for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I had this theory I shared recently, right? So when people ask me what I think about the gray aliens, I think the smaller ones are a biomechanical robot, an advanced robot with the conscious upload. I
would agree.
Yeah, and then the beings themselves, they stay out of our atmosphere, and they observe from outside the atmosphere. So look at the grays as being drones down here doing their work. 9 out of 10 times if someone describes a taller aliens, it's almost like they're a projection, which is what I would do. If I'm observing another planet and the atmosphere is not breathable and or the disease might be rampant, send the robots down. And then when I need to go there and visually see something, project me onto that when my technology is at that point. Now, that being said.
Well, this is consistent with people who have been abductees. Hell, guys like Whitley Strieber. There was all the little guys running around, but then when it came down to the supervisory, the female who was actually interacting with them, she was very tall.
Yeah. So that on that same note, now you have this being who has this, we'll call it corporation watching Earth. Like we're one of their favorite channels. And are there other races? Sure. But then those other races would contract the being for their grays. They use the grays to do exactly what they've been doing. We want to go look at these humans up close, but we're gonna rent out some of your gray aliens to go look at them. And I think that's how it works, because never do I hear any reports of like these reptilians doing anything scientific. It always seems to be something, I don't know, not so benign.
I got to stop you there.
Yeah,
I got to stop you there.
Sure.
Okay. I am one of these people who's really, to use a rough term, pissed off with the agenda, with the quote, the rough, you Google reptilians
right
in these groups. You always get this picture of this overly muscular, ready to tear you apart from limb to limb kind of guy. Okay.
No, see, that's
reptilian.
The majority of the people I do a lot of off podcast interviews. The majority of them tell me that they're very human-like. The only difference is their blood temperature and their exterior.
Okay. The ones that I have interviewed.
Right.
Okay. Who had sketches of them and things like this. The sketches were consistent. Okay. They were gentle. The reptilians were gentle, soft spoken, and quite enlightened.
Huh. Yeah, the ones I've spoken to, they it seems to me that they are speaking to them about, and when I say telepathy, and I say this a lot too, the human brain, if you look at it, great conductor of energy. It's the most complex computer on planet Earth today still. And when you look at it, the way it's developed, it looks like it could have a receiver. And that's a whole other subject that I'd spoken about before. But when you close your ears, you put your hands over your ears.
You're thinking hardware, though.
Right, yeah. I think
you're thinking hardware. Please understand, we are connected to everything, everywhere, every when.
I agree.
We have very chattered mind, especially in Western culture. We have very, very chattering minds. What we call it in Buddhist. When I lived in a monastery, we called it monkey chatter Western minds.
Right.
Okay. You quiet someone's mind down with deep meditation, that type of thing, and it's a whole different story as far as being able to reach out and touch someone.
I can believe that. I'll tell you, I say this again for the supercomputer in our head. How many reports of car accidents? Like the one gentleman did you ever read about that report from the guy from the 90s? Bad car wreck, massive head trauma, and now could play the piano at a master's level? That blows. When I've read that, I was in disbelief.
I think he's a walk-in. Do you know what walk-ins are?
Hold on. I've just recently heard this before. I think it was one of my MUFON guests. The walk-ins where it's where they kind of take over.
Okay, think of it like this. Say you grow up. Okay, you grow up. handled most of the karmic things you have to do in this lifetime.
Right.
Which is, you have this perfectly good body. Now, here's this other enlightened being. We're talking like at the soul level.
Okay.
That doesn't want to bother with the whole kid thing and growing up again and all this kind of running the risk of messing up his own karma, okay, by being a stupid kid.
Right.
And they agree to swap.
Huh.
And so think of it as an agreed upon possession, so to speak. And a lady by the name of, you can probably find the book, it's an old book, but you can probably find it by Ruth Montgomery. Okay, Ruth Montgomery. And there was documented cases of people who were dying on the battlefield one moment and seemingly a very different person than the guy that was laying there bleeding to death. Okay. There's people who've had car wrecks, and then after they survived a car wreck from a near death experience, the families, wives and kids and everything would say, who the hell is that?
Huh.
Okay. I've met a couple of walk-ins, and the people I interviewed, this is a long time ago, people I interviewed told me, it was like he had this car wreck and it doesn't seem like it's not the same guy, Ruth Montgomery, you made a comment that if the person had been an alcoholic, they are no longer an alcoholic because the same man would have stayed an alcoholic, that kind of thing. So there's it's sort of a possession thing, but it's more of an agreement kind of thing between two souls.
Right. I've seen a lot of books by her, by the way.
Who gets to drive the vehicle, so to speak. And well,
I'll tell you why that makes sense.
Going into the woo-woo a little bit here.
Yeah, I get it, but it makes sense to me because I think the soul and I think our conscious are one and the same, and I think our body is a vessel for it, right? And then just like when hey, my machine's not working so well, I need to get uploaded to the cloud again so I can download to a better machine, right?
Yeah, there's something like that. Yeah,
I see a book here by her. Strangers Among Us.
It's a classic on that topic matter. It really is.
Yeah, I'm going to check that out.
Something I was doing some research on recently. I'm a retired Wicca priestess. Okay, and in the course of something, I was working with this one spiritual group that had several of its members are acting as vessels for some of the more famous like Greek gods.
Right.
Okay. I know it sounds far-fetched.
Well, if you remove the word gods, it's just, again, it's another form of energy, just one higher than the other. Very
highly evolved being. Okay. And they had the ability to either channel those things. Now there's a ceremony within like even a simple Wicca ritual where the priestess does a thing called a prayer called Charge of the Goddess. And very frequently as she starts, it's not uncommon, very frequently for the priestess, when she starts reciting this prayer, at some point during that, she channels the goddess and it's a whole different person telling you the rest of it.
Right.
Okay. And I've seen it happen many times. So in the course of that kind of a conversation, I was consulting with some other pagan clergy that I know. And the term, this one person who's very well researched on the topic, the term, and you see this a lot, like in the voodoo community, the Afro-Caribbean type community,
right?
Spiritual community. And people think, oh, that person got possessed, and they went kind of mad. No. That was probably a very normal thing for that possession. There are what they call ritual possessions, where a deity, one of the lesser deities, comes in and channels or performs something for the congregation. Okay.
Right.
Now, vanilla white American Wiccans and pagans don't necessarily get this. Trust me, most of them don't. They get spooked when they hear about somebody carrying a god or a goddess, okay, or channeling somebody like a god or a goddess, okay. And I've seen this. I've documented it, and it's a unique experience to watch what happens. The bottom line on the whole thing for all this is that technically anybody, anywhere could channel a higher being, provided that the person is has certain qualities about them, particularly a little on very much on the mental and spiritual quiet side. Okay. But the Hollywood would make you think that all the possessions are this evil, maniacal kind of thing.
Right.
And what nobody tells you is that it's not uncommon for various pagan deities to grace their I don't like the term worshipers, but their followers, so to speak.
Sure.
Or worshiper also works.
Constituents, we'll call it that.
Constituents, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Grace them with their pleasure. You know, I mean, what a bunch of Norse folks would not love to have Thor come down in the middle of their congregation.
Right. You know,
Okay.
to speak to that, there has to be balance, right? If people acknowledge and accept the idea of there being evil possession, you have to accept the idea maybe there's a good possession, right?
Thank you.
And
yes,
you have to, everything has to have a balance. Now, what's to say that some of these people that I don't want to say possession, walk-ins, right? And they generally go into a position where they can make good decisions for humanity as a whole. I mean, we don't know. Like,
yes, they can.
Like
In
even like
fact,
God,
a lot of these people have gone off and done amazing things.
right? You know, they have to step in at some point. I mean, so yeah, I think there would have to be balance. So if anyone's willing to say possession is real and it's evil, well, then there's a counterbalance always.
Right. Usually, it's evil if somebody doesn't understand it.
Well, of course. I mean, it's
We've
sad
had the Catholic Church for what how many centuries, telling us everything but them is bad.
Yeah, and
of course we have since found out how many people have been molested over the centuries. I mean, by their priests. You know,
even if you set that aside, when I'll tell you what happened to me. I grew up Catholic, Christian in a sense, and when I started as a kid, when I got interested in space, and then I found out and the Hubble telescope. When the Hubble telescope started showing us images, and I was like, "There's no way that we were just built." There's no shot. There's so much out there. Like we could not comprehend. There could be life just like us on the other side of the Milky Way, and it takes 100,000 years for a sound wave to cross the Milky Way. Right? There's not any human lifetime we're going to learn about life that's on the other side. But other than connections that we had spoken about. But that's about the time. And I was like, I can't subscribe to the idea that God made Earth and us, and that's it. I think if there's an architect, I've removed the word God, an architect who's created everything.
It's a greater, what we call, I think using modern mythology, it's the force. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's how I teach my students. Okay. That just think of it, take away the guy. Don't belittle the force by putting a face of your favorite deity on it.
Exactly.
Okay. It's bigger than that. Okay. But we all carry a spark of it within us. We're not separate from us. We never have been.
I agree with you.
And that's what a lot of people miss. They keep thinking that, heaven's out there. No, I'm sorry. We are connected to everything, everywhere. And the people who can demonstrate this to you are the remote viewers. Okay. I've taught 5 different remote viewing classes over a 24-year period. Okay. And these were like a 1 weekend class. This is like every weekend for like a year type of thing with these people. And they got very good at what they did. And we discovered some things. We found out that things like your own deep-seated self-preservation impacts your ability to remote view certain things. Give an example. I got 6 people sitting here doing a remote viewing. They don't know what the target is. But in that target card's a 3x5 card that says, visit the HRMS Titanic where it is now, 2 miles under ocean. Okay. Right. And some of the people have to put their pen down. Sometimes they scribble in the margin. I can't go there. That type of thing.
I mean,
and when we have sent them to the moon, to Tranquility Base, we have sent them to Mars to follow Spirit around. Okay. Back when it was operational. Okay. and I took the class. I took a meeting. I threw a party one afternoon, and I had about 8 people who were the best remote viewers I had taught over about a 10-year period. And I didn't know what was in the cards, but I knew they were high risk targets. Okay.
Huh.
And different ones, they would put their pen down if they couldn't do it. Sometimes it was someplace like Mars. Sometimes it was those water geysers on one of Saturn's moons. Okay. And then one day, all of them, except one woman, put their pens down. Some of the people scribbled in the margins, "I can't go there. I won't find my way back." And where did I send them? Okay. I didn't know what a card was until we had done. Okay. But I had stuffed those cards like a month or 2 months before. I didn't know what was in them. Okay. The target was, at that time, this was in 2013. This was the first Voyager out there at the edge of the solar system.
Oh, wow.
And we had one lady. She crawled. She went through the protocols. She sat there. She crawled all over that thing. She's drawing pictures of it in the margins, all this stuff. She was all over that thing. But she was the only one of the whole group. They all knew how to meditate, but she was a very deep meditator, and she was a risk taker. She happened to be a witch, but that meant it doesn't. I know a lot of witches who aren't risk takers, but this lady was a very clear risk taker, and she just went for broke. Okay, so somebody asked me sometime back, well, could one of your remote viewers touch an alien on Zeta Reticula, 39 light years from now? In theory, yes, but one, they got to be deeply meditated. They got to be good at it.
And have a roundabout idea of direction. Because here's another thing, too. And I'd spoken to some people that had done remote. You're not exactly traveling through time the same way when you leave.
No.
It's
not.
And I always thought this to myself, too, even as a kid. My imagination made me think, if we're ever going to cross the vastness of space.
You're not crossing. You're connecting.
Right. That's exactly my point. That the
every
idea that
cell in your body is wired to every atom all through the universe.
Right. So you would have to essentially use the cosmic web almost like that fiber optic cable. Yeah. And so that being said, I always said to myself, if we were going to explore space, it would have to be at the energy level. There's no way we're going to physically do it.
Yeah, and the one thing we're not doing is we're not training our psychics.
Well, and here's
blows it off as something.
I'll tell you who doesn't blow it off. The government doesn't blow it off. They use that program,
they don't, but they had to go dark with it because when Stargate project got revealed back around 95, the Christian right got all upset. Oh, we can't be spending our tax dollars on that evil stuff, And all it did was go dark. Yeah, all it did was go into the black programs. Okay. But I will tell you something. There was a target card, a couple of different times we had target cards for certain places. Once a particular military installation in Texas. One was the White House. Do you know the term warding? Do you know what warding is?
No, I'm not familiar with it. Warding evil?
Think of it like magical protection around something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, my wife had her intern stuff about 50 to 60 cards, envelopes for us, and then had another intern put the random number on the outside using a random number generator. So I had absolutely no idea what those cards were stuffed with, those envelopes were stuffed with, as a proctor and an instructor. So I was always surprised when we opened the envelope at the end of the session. Okay.
Right.
And the better classes, pretty dead on. Okay. What was I saying?
The warding of probably. And
warding. Well, one of the cards happened to have a picture of the White House in it. And they went there and they wrote some stuff down. They put their pens down and says, "We can't go any further with this." I said, "That's unusual. One or two people putting their pen down is one thing, but everybody putting their pen down, that is unprecedented." I said, so we started going through a briefing. What's going on? What'd you get? I said, they didn't want us there. Okay. It's the same thing. You visit the alien base on the backside of the moon. Most of the remote viewers, if they manage to touch it, come back and say, whoever those folks were, they didn't want us there.
So that's a very
common statement.
So they have some sort of method of I guess, stopping that projection?
Well, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, me. I mean, you got to understand the government, everything you're doing, So you and your
they've
class.
done before.
Yeah,
probably,
and they have
the
resources.
CIA was monkeying around with this stuff during World War II, for God's sake.
Yeah, I mean, they have the resources to absolutely go way far beyond what you're teaching, right? I mean, the world experts, because there's no doubt in the government's minds that, maybe our enemies are doing this. And how do we protect against them? How do we get to be? It's like the weapons race.
And they're also in a position to snag people who are maybe come to quote medical attention.
Yeah.
Okay. Psychiatric attention. That somebody is like overtly gifted in this, can't do it. Maybe they're a savant with this kind of stuff. They can't do much of anything else, but boy, they can see across the solar system. I suspect they are wired in that way. Okay, the government is, and they got probably psychiatrists who are on the payroll working in different clinics around the country to say, hey, if you see somebody like this, send them our way, and I suspect that they've had that kind of thing for years.
I mean, so here's this. Proven. This is proven. We know this to a certainty. The government is definitely experimenting with remote viewing. We know that to a certainty. That's been released some time ago. We also know to a certainty they utilize psychics and astrologers. We know these things from them releasing the information. Now, the government's experimenting with this and probably still continue to. Now imagine a more sophisticated, more advanced race. They're well beyond that, So
yeah,
that's why when I've noticed a pattern. I don't know if you noticed or not. Maybe I'm the only to notice it. Some of the MUFON people agreed with it. I noticed that abductions have slowed down significantly since 2009. And I did more research into that. And what I believe is in our homes, we have microphones, cameras, and just they could observe us now with extreme ease. Not to mention also, like us, our technology advances. So does theirs. They probably have a much better system now that would really render you out. You wouldn't even know anything happened. You'd have no clue, zero. So there's a lot of factors I play into that. For you, I'll ask you this. And before I even ask it, I'll state what I think. I don't think they're going to be anything less than benign. We're here to be studied. So if they were going to do anything harmful to us, I assure you they would have did it long before we had nuclear capability.
Thank you. People say, "Oh, they're going to come down and invade us." I said they could have done it a long time ago, 500 years ago.
Yeah, they would have got us.
They could have killed our whole population back in biblical times.
Right. We're definitely under a long-term observation till we hit this. There's a specific point. I think that
remember something. Remember something, though.
Huh.
They are us and we are them.
Well, yeah, one and the same, especially when it comes to the energy and everything connected. I get that.
And our connectivity, they respect the fact that we are the sacredness of life. And of course, we don't respect life hardly at all on this planet.
Well, no, I mean, that's the point I was going to make. I think when things are going to change, and I said this before, it's like when we get to a point where we don't have race, religion, and politics as dividers, and we start acknowledging one another as a species.
Thank you.
I think that's about the time when we'll be eligible to learn more. I'll say.
Well, somebody asked me, I think it was like about a week ago. Somebody asked me what I thought of like what happened in the garden, so to speak. I said I don't think it went down the way we think it went down.
No, I don't either.
But I said my best sources tell me those nice, soft-spoken, very enlightened reptilians, the proverbial snake in the garden. Okay. Looked at somebody like Eve and said, "You're better than this." Remember, we were kept, we were in the garden. We were just caged animals in the garden, but it was a very nice cage, but it was caged animals in a garden. And Zudi said to Eve, "Oh, you're better than this."
Yeah, not to mention in the evolutionary scale, we've definitely skipped a couple of places.
Yeah.
When you look at every other living thing on this planet, and given the timeline that we've been on this planet, we definitely played leapfrog in the evolution chain.
Do you know what the they say they call it the apple? Do you know what the forbidden thing was?
No, I'm curious.
It wasn't just Adam. It was just men in general.
Sure.
Do you know what it was?
No.
Okay. We were a hunter-gatherer culture at that time.
Right.
what we'll call the garden, not just even Adam, but a rather large tribe of humans. Okay. And they would go off on the hunt, and they would come back, and they would have their different families of them would gather with their kin, and they would eat these animals. Okay. Well, it was discovered, and this has been scientifically proven now in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. They found these pits, and they couldn't understand what these small pits were. It turned out that they were used to make beer.
Huh. And
the trick was, when all these hunting parties come back, you could not run out of beer without causing a small riot. Okay. They had to have the beer.
Sounds like now.
what? Yeah. Like now. Now, what did that force? It forced the demand, forced the supply side, which was mostly women, to go out and culture agriculture for the materials you need to grow to make beer. And I'm getting this from real papers, by the way.
Right.
This is real scientific research and stuff they found in Göbekli Tepe. Okay, and that's probably one of the oldest settlement things.
And if you look at that location, by the way, that's not just some old small structure. That's complex.
It's amazingly complex.
Right.
And they haven't found it all either, you know. And so that's one of the things they discovered, and one of the things that is almost kind of a humorous joke among the archaeologists is that the forbidden fruit in the garden was beer, because it forced us into the fields, and we stopped being a hunter-gatherer culture and became an agricultural culture to supply and demand, you know, supply chain. That's what this all was about.
Yeah, I mean, I could subscribe to that. I'll tell you that long before, when I hear the garden, I have to think they mean Earth, you know, the planet, because I don't think there's one site that's more holy than the other one.
No, I would agree. I would agree with you there.
And unfortunately, those are those type of ideologies are what, you know, the foundation of war, essentially, right? Like, believe like me or die. Like, it's a very it's not a very species like way to behave.
But think about it a minute. Okay, think of the planet as the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Okay, as you said, think about that for a moment. If you take the idea that there was tons of wildlife out there, and these tribes of humans could go out there and hunt to their heart's content and come back with huge amounts of meat for everybody to eat, and everybody, and they didn't just eat all of it. But the archaeologists found out when they were researching the bones in the waste pits, they ate only the best cuts. They were ditching the lesser cuts. They found, because they could tell by the bones that were being left in the disposal pile.
Kind of like now.
Yeah, sort of like now. Yeah. So when I saw those papers, and then I saw a documentary on it, and this was a scholar documentary, I'm like, wow, you know, that explains it, and it adds more fuel to what you suggested. Maybe the whole planet was Garden of Eden.
I mean, I have to believe
it's a very green planet, huh? You know?
I have the hardest time, even as a kid, even when you're a kid and whatever your parents tell you, whatever you learn, that's the facts. I had a hard time subscribing to that as a kid. I was like, there's no way we came from two people. We'd all have like syndromes, you know, or problems. Like it doesn't. I remember being a kid, and one of my best friends was this kid Jason, and he was Turkish, and one of my other really good friends was this kid Craig, and he was Chinese, and I remember we had this conversation about I forget the kid's last name. It was someone that wasn't in our group, but anyway, he approached us, and he had brought up the idea of like where he goes to church, and where he went to church was like something different. I really can't remember what it was. It wasn't a synagogue, but it was different than where we went. And my friend kid that was Chinese, he didn't go to church. They prayed at home. And I remember being a kid, like, why do I have to go somewhere? And they don't have to do this. And he goes to that one. That looks nicer than mine. So for me, it wasn't a question of why are you different? It's more like, why do they get it better than me? I go to, because Catholic church, when you go to Catholic, that's an event. forget it. You got to have the patience of a saint because you're there for a while. It doesn't matter what it is. And so as kids, we would discuss this, and later on in hindsight, you look at it, it's like these weird differences. All these religions have kind of the same great message, right? But somehow, even though they all have this wonderful message, we find ways to dislike one another over some minuscule belief. It's crazy.
Politics.
Right. So then I think to myself later on in life, if I'm an advanced life form and I'm observing these people, they're going to remain under observation, and they're not eligible to speak to us because they look what they're doing down there. There's no shot they're going to communicate with us at a higher level. We're going to have to separate ourselves from ourselves.
At one of the UFO conferences, I used to have permission, even though I was press, I had permission to sit in the early morning. I don't know if you've been to some of these conferences, but some of them have like an early morning, like the conference doesn't get going till like 9 o'clock, but they would have like a 7 o'clock to about 8:30 in the morning private session. It was like an AA meeting for the experiencers.
Right.
Okay. And I went there a couple different years at this one, and I finally went to the psychologist who acted as a moderator. And I said, yeah, I know I'm press. I won't out anybody. I'd like to learn. And she was kind enough to let me start sitting in. And the first time I went to one of these things, I thought I was going to meet, I believed all this crap you'd see on the upper cable channels. Oh, I got probed. It was terrible, and I went to this thing. My spouse was with me. We were both at this one convention. We both half expected to go in there and meet 25 or 30 people crying in their coffee. They got probed. Okay. Or they took their eggs or something, Right. And we get in there. There's 175 people in this room, and the meeting's got all the energy of a tent revival. And the general consensus, it was scary, but those folks are great, and they're telling us to take care of our planet, Yeah. And we're going, wow, this is not what I expected, So I started really, really getting really close to the experiencers, and a bunch of them that were willing to communicate with me. But have you ever interviewed Ray Hernandez from Free?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you should. Put
him in contact.
The book I'm talking about, the Beyond UFOs, right?
I literally know so little about the books. I made it my business to learn.
Write this down.
Got it.
Beyond UFOs. Okay. The book is the size of a New York City phone book.
Wow.
It's 3-4 inches deep. They did this huge study with about.
What's the author's name again?
Ray Hernandez. It's Virgilio. Afterwards, I'll send you the proper spelling of the guy's name. Okay.
Got it.
And he's a smart guy. He's like he's a doctor of he's a doctor level lawyer. Okay. And he works for the government. But one of the things, him and I had a really interesting talk at the Ozark conference a couple of years ago. And we got into this really deep talk. There was this, there was all the presentations going on, right? And they had these ladies out there from the hotel. You can go get a piece of pie, a piece of cake, a cup of coffee, something like this. So him and I ordered up a couple of things. We were sitting there at this little cocktail type table there in this like little eating area, and we started getting this deep conversation. Okay. And during the course of this very deep conversation, we're not exactly whispering. When we got done with it, 25, 40 minutes later, we looked around and there was like 40 people had pulled up their chairs and were listening to this friendly argument, so to speak. Okay.
All the while in a meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. It was wonderful. Everybody's sitting there stuffing their face with, banana cream pie and things, that's what I was eating. And one of the points came up was that Ray has said he had talked to people who were hellfire and brimstone Bible thumpers. They got abducted. They came back spiritual. He has had any number of people who were agnostic or atheist, got abducted, came back spiritual. Denomination is an issue. Now, throw that out the window.
Right.
Being spiritual is a whole different flavor. It's this whole idea of being connected, being part of the universe, connected to everything, everywhere, every when. Okay. That whole mystical idea. And Ray and I, during the course of this conversation, he said, look, He says, people keep saying, why do people, excuse me, why are people seeing all these UFOs? Why are why are the ETs letting us see them? They've got stealth technology. Why are they letting us see them? And I had only been out of the monastery a couple of years, and I said, well, wait a minute now. One of the biggest problems we have as our human culture is we do not have an elastic view of reality. Okay,
Right.
we get this very narrow view, tunnel vision almost. Okay, now you come along with ET and gives us something that's almost a spiritual experience. It expands your view of reality. And I've had lamas, more than one lama, tell me, the average person probably has no idea how much paranormal stuff is going on right around them because they've got this narrow view of reality, what they think is possible, and not realizing how much is going on inches from them. And they need to just expand their elastic view of reality and expand that reality view a little bit. And that was one of the things they taught us in the monastery, was to look at things bigger. Heck, I've had Wicca students that if I brought up the topic of we're sitting here trying to talk about magic and witchcraft and all this stuff, and I brought up the topic of UFOs, I had a third of the class get up and leave. Oh, we don't believe in that crap.
You gotta here's my thing. I approach everything with no filters on. Everything.
Thank you.
You can't do it. You're gonna miss something. And to your point, let's forget about the bigger picture enlightenment. There's people walking around today with their face in their phone. 80% of the times they're missing just regular life instead of the bigger pictures.
Yes.
So
I'm in the process of putting out a book right now. It's called Magical Musings of a Rogue Witch. Okay. When a Wicca priestess retires, there's this expectation that you will write your book of your take on like the magical world. It might be running your coven. It might be a book of spells. It could be any number of things. I decided to take on magical mechanics. Okay. And that was the approach. And there is a line quite literally in my book that said that kind of what you just said, that one reality, you've got to have a bigger view of reality, and you do not, and I literally say it this way: you do not become a Jedi Knight bowing to the little god in your phone 80 times a day.
Yeah, truth. I'm glad you said that, because on my actual forms in life, I wrote myself as a Jedi.
Yeah,
that's what I put.
I use that term a number of times in the book, because I say, I don't care if you're trying to become a mystic. I don't care if you're trying to become a great mage. I don't care if you're becoming a Jedi Knight. You don't get these things. You don't manage this stuff if you don't do these things, like learn to meditate, learn to quiet yourself, get rid of your addictions, and right. That's kind of where the flavor of it. But I made that whole comment about Jedi Knights, and boy, it struck a nerve with a bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like even for me, most of my day, I'll listen to music, but I'll have like no TV on. I try to stay in thought. I need at least 3 hours a day where I'm just in deep thought. And it doesn't matter what I'm thinking about, so long as I'm in a deep thought about it, and I come to some sort of conclusion before the day's over. Otherwise, when you're watching TV all day, all you're really doing is making the time pass by, but you're entertained somewhat. And I think that sucks. I'll tell you why. I hate if I sit down and watch TV and then I look up and 5 hours passed. In my opinion, I lost a day. The day's gone. I dislike that. I try to, even if it's something as minuscule, just walking around the house and thinking about something. Even when I shot pool a lot, because I felt like I was out doing something. But the point I make is, I don't spend time on my phone. I was guilty of that at some point in my life, but not anymore. Because I don't want to look up at the clock like, wow, where did 3 hours go? What did I do?
Thank you.
You're going to miss something like that. You're absolutely going to miss things. Something I did when I was a kid. I don't currently do, and I'm going to get back to doing it. Just go for a walk without intention or direction. Just go for a walk. Look at the trees. Look at the skies. Breathe air. And if I can help it, no music either. Just to be, because I used to do it as a kid, and I don't do it anymore. And I feel like today, what's today? Today's blah, blah, blah. It's day. You don't want that to be where every day is just day. Just go out and experience something. And if you want.
Well, okay. Let me tell you something. Once you retire, trust me, Linda only retired about a month ago.
Go ahead.
Okay, now I've been retired for a few years now, but I warned her when she says, "Well, I think I'm sick of the job. I want to retire." And I said, "Let me warn you something right now. Retirement in about after the first 2 or 3 weeks, you get to go to the mall every day or all this other stuff you want to do. So please understand something. It turns into the 4-day weekend from hell. It turns into Groundhog Day. Trust me, And she didn't believe me. And just a few days ago, we went through this month-long interstate move. We've been here a month now. We still got boxes sitting here in the front room. But the bottom line is she's noticing that.
Yeah.
And we got snowed in. We had a 24-inch snowfall out here over the last day or so. And she says, we can't go out any place. This is a big deal. We got streaming. We got streaming in there if you want to go and watch TV. But we don't watch more than 2 hours of TV a day. And I said, yeah, I know. Because she's a Zen master. So neither one of us really care to watch TV. This is something we really want to watch,
Yeah, you want to keep the brain going, right? Positively. You want a good cognitive interaction.
No, we don't watch mindless crap. There's a lot of mindless crap out there.
Yeah.
The other night we actually had we sat there and had a little bit of a binge and watched like 3 episodes of The Witcher. Okay. We like to go up on Acorn, and we get the Acorn service, and we like to watch a 90-minute murder mystery every night,
Right.
And, but that's it, there's something to stimulate the mind, but we don't watch mindless stuff. It's not like we're going to sit there and watch like some of these mindless situation comedies they got out there.
I watch an unhealthy amount of documentaries.
Well, okay, yeah, I do that too.
And
I used to.
I'm currently learning more about ancient Greece and it's disturbing that you watch these documentaries. Some of them are like 4 hours long, and these are like Harvard people reading it. And it's disturbing when you're watching this. And when I say watching, it's just some guy speaking and there's small images, right? Because you're really learning the information being spoken. And it's disturbing when I listen to this. I'm like, I didn't learn any of that in school. Why did they not teach me that?
Yeah.
Really bothered me.
Yeah. I'm when I say when Wicca priest is, okay, it doesn't mean that you have a specific deity as a Wicca priest. A lot of people, when they study it or initially study it, they tend to use the gods that were called out in the books by the Gardnerians or by the Alexandrians or something like that. And it might probably be Greek pantheon, typically is. I found that I had connections to Egypt. And so I became over many, many years, I'm a priestess of Isis. Okay. And so it's not uncommon if a friend of mine put me on, hey, there's this whole series of things on the Smithsonian Channel. So I went up there one day and I binge watch a bunch of these things, but it was less Travel Channel, and it certainly wasn't an Ancient Aliens kind of flavor view of Egypt. It was a very serious academic examination of ancient Egyptian culture from what they were digging out of the sides of hills.
That's what I prefer to watch.
Yeah. That's what I like to watch myself.
Yeah, I it's going to sound ridiculous, but I started watching this program called Modern Marvel some time ago, and I got fixated on it. How to build things, where we made them from, the industry, when you start seeing things from how it's made from the ground up, it really alters the way you look at everything you see in life.
Thank you.
So I'm one of those people. I used to
like that program myself.
Yeah, I want to learn more. It's not good enough for me to know, all right, so this is how space rockets get to space. I want to know where they built them, how they came with the concept, the design. Especially when I was learning how we get to Mars. It's not. I think people have this idea that we just go straight there. It's not that easy,
No.
It's rather challenging, in fact. So those are
a lot
things
of
I want to
people
learn.
who got really good grades in mathematics that can do the astrophysics math.
Yeah, and you got to have a pretty good imagination too, because and this is something I say a lot. This is my belief. Today's science was yesterday's theory, and yesterday's theory was the imagination of a child.
Thank you.
That's how it works.
Thank you.
And so that's how I tend to look at things. So when I ask questions, like the big thing I do in this show, I do my best to not learn about my guests. Because I want it to be like what we just had. We sat down, we had a conversation, we learned we had some disagreements, but it's a conversation and it's organic. And the beauty of the podcast of this may be is that people get to eavesdrop on what we're talking about. That's really all it is. You know,
they won't get this talk anyplace else. I guarantee it.
Yeah, I don't like the.
I opened up more for you on some topic matters than and let it mix into other topic matters more than I would other places. So
I appreciate that. Like I said, I want to treat everyone in a way where they could just talk to me and we're just having a conversation. Don't worry about who believes what. Here's the biggest part about.
Can I give you 5 minutes of UFO statistics theory?
Yes.
Okay. All right. People always ask Linda and I, where'd you come up with this idea of doing UFO statistics? One, nobody else was doing it. And when I was writing my column, my beat was New York State, since I was a New York State journalist. And I started adding up counties. Okay. And while MUFON gathered county information when you file a report, it's dependent upon you, the person who's making the report, to indicate what county it is.
Right.
Okay. And they don't backfill it if you don't. Okay. And a lot of people don't know what county they're in, especially if they were out of town and away from home when they saw the sighting or something like this. And the National UFO Reporting Center, which has probably 60% of the sightings, if you combine both databases, they don't collect county data at all. Okay. And early on, this is back in, 2000. I started writing my column in 2013. So let's say around 2014, I reached out to New Fork and I said, hey, do you have county data in there? You just need to turn something on to put it on the website. And they said, no, we don't. I said, well, how can I get that information? Stick a pin in the map was their solution.
What?
Honest to God, that's an honest answer I got from them.
Man.
Okay. So Linda and I had done all New York State, and over a period of about 6 months, and it fueled my articles because people think, oh, writing a column must be fun, right? No, think of it this way. Yes, it's fun when you start, but think of it this way. It's a 500-word term paper by Thursday night. Wow. Every Thursday night. It's a 500-word term paper. Okay. And you have to deliver. I had to have it every Thursday night. Okay. And so that's what people didn't understand. So I had something to write about. So this gave me stuff to write about. Of course, I had sighting stories and things like that I could put in there. But when I was dry for something, we'd dig these numbers out and start telling you what, there was an unusual amount of sightings around a particular lake or, whatever. Okay. We shared some of this stuff with a bunch of retired MUFON state directors, state investigators, that type of thing, retired guys. And they were looking at our data and they said, wait a minute, we didn't know there was a cluster there. We didn't know there was a cluster there either, that kind of stuff,
Right.
Everybody always assumed the Lake Erie effect, that's where the stuff is, or down in the Hudson Valley. And ground zero in New York State turned out to be Suffolk County, Long Island. Who knew?
You got a point. I'll tell you this to MUFON's defense, and Douglas Wilson's he's now the director of investigations for the United States. He's addressing a lot of the issues as far as cross communication with their directors and investigators, and I think it's important not just for MUFON, but it's also important for people in those areas to be more mindful of where they are. Like when you see, like if I see something right now, and I'm here in Florida, I'm in Tampa, I know my county, I'm pretty good about taking note.
Well, no, if you got a phone, you can pretty much say, where am I?
Yeah.
Okay. But, but older sightings, and this is the other thing. Linda and I looked at this and said, look, everybody out there is they think the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s are the golden age of UFOs.
Yeah.
And Linda said, why don't we, since we need a niche, let's work with the 21st century. Nobody seems to be working with anything since 2000.
Right.
So that's what we started doing. Okay. And everybody, in fact, when our first book came out, people said, why didn't you go back 40 years was their mentality. You wouldn't believe how many notes and letters I got. They said, why didn't you go back 40 years? So when we went to work on the second book last year, I actually had MUFON share with me from 1960 to 2000, and I captured the same information from Newfork. Believe me, it's not an easy job to make that data compatible with each other.
Right.
Trust me, it is not, because they're two totally different databases and nothing lines up, and it's not easy to line them up. Okay. But I put them together, and the 40 years from 1960 to end of 2000 totaled 13,150 reported sightings between the two national databases. Okay. That sounds like a lot.
In that specific location?
No.
Oh, just
United States.
Okay.
Okay. 13,150. I've got that many in 2000 and 2012 and 2013 on each year.
Huh.
Okay. We are in the platinum age of UFO sightings, and almost nobody knows about it. Okay. From 2001 to 2020, we had 167,632 reported sightings, and only 1 in 250 people reports what they see.
You know, that's true. That's a lot of people will just, that's true. A lot of people just be like, I don't know. I'm not going to say anything because I don't know definitively. Right.
Well, you know how we figured that out?
Huh.
The sightings information reported data we had, okay, between two databases, but we were following the polls, and of course the polls used to say, 36% believe, and depending upon how you want to spin it, 36% believe, or they'll say 60% don't believe. If you see what I'm saying,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, you got to see how some of these pollsters spin it. Okay. Oh, only 30% believe in this stuff. It's how you present it. All right. 36% believe, 42% is on the fence, and about 17% think it's all hogwash. Okay. And this has been a pretty consistent, give or take 1 point or 2 points here or there with these polls. National Geographic in 2012, a couple other ones in the individual. And then in 2017, Fox Pictures was getting ready to release kind of a horror movie set against the backdrop of the Phoenix Lights back in 1997. A couple teenagers disappear, alluding that they got abducted and everything.
That was a small budget film, right?
Yeah, it was.
I do remember hearing about that. There was some sort of it was like a Blair Witch kind of perspective.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. But they did a national poll, and they got the same numbers everybody else, 36%, 40 something percent, and 17%, whatever. But they asked an additional question. And the additional question was, have you ever seen a UFO? 16.74% said they had seen a UFO of adults. Is the number of ways it tracked back. Well, okay, so it's adult people. So we cranked the number, and it was roughly, okay, if you had 328 million people, 76% of that is adult. Okay, this is census data I'm talking about here. Okay, right. This is easily refinable information. So we took the adults, then we cranked 16% against it, and it basically came out around 42 million people. Okay. Well, 42 million people, 16%, that's a fifth of the adult population says they have seen a UFO. But I've only got, that's 42 million, 42 to 45 million people. And I'm sitting there saying, but I've only got 167,632.
That's bothersome.
I didn't trust the metric. 2 years later, Gallup does a poll. Okay, and they put the spin on it. Oh, only 30% believe in this stuff. They did that spin, but they measured. Did you ever see one? And it came up this 16% number, slightly different on the decimal point part of it, but it was basically 16%. So we cranked that number again, and we worked some gymnastics with it, mathematical gymnastics, and we came up. Instead of trying to do the United States number as a whole, we took each individual state against their population and the amount of sightings they had. Okay. And I got to tell you, by the way, I'm somebody who who flunked math through high school. So when the first book of statistics came out, I got calls from people I hadn't heard from in 40 years saying, Cheryl, we've got 6 dead math teachers rolling over in their grave like a rotisserie. Okay,
but,
you did
by
a
the
book of
way,
statistics?
a lot of geniuses that we know, some big name geniuses, failed math in high school. So, you know.
Well, you know what happened was in kindergarten, they gave us these IQ tests, and there were 2 kids that had the highest IQ tests in the school. Okay. And the other one went to Annapolis. No, I'm sorry. No, he went to West Point. And I nearly flunked out of high school. Okay.
Right.
Got in the Air Force, and they figured out I was dyslexic. They said, my God, your IQ used to be a member of Mensa, you know? And so I literally in my late 20s retaught myself. Went out and bought used high school math books at the used bookstore.
Right.
And I quite literally, with a hand calculator, mechanics of of arithmetic were a problem for me, you know. But once I had a calculator in my hand, later an Apple II computer, I was able to play with the numbers, and I became sort of a mathematician.
Yeah, more inclined.
More inclined, yes.
Yeah.
And and then when things like Excel came along, there was nothing I couldn't do. I just had to visualize how I was going to do it. And
so when you're running through these statistics, it's got to be frustrating when you're hearing these numbers. It seems like there's more people that state belief than report it.
Yeah. Well, we did the curve. Okay. Remember, we did all the states and everything.
Right.
And it ran from as low as 1 in 150 people, went up the curve, down the other side, and 1 in 475 people. And then at the top of the bell curve, it was a range of about 1 in 120 to 1 in 155, you know, something like that. So I usually round it off and say 1 in 250 people reports what they see. And the number, I mean, when you crank it back, the number only moves like a couple of little digits, 2 decimal points over. I mean, it's pretty solid. It really is. And that's how many people report what they see, supposedly, by the way we calculate it. And that's based on polls, and polling data is considered good metrics. So, yeah, a lot of people don't know that. So the bottom line is, why did we make that book a pink book?
Yes.
We got called in 2019 by, I'm just going to call them the usual suspects in DC.
Right.
And they called us up and said, you know, if Senator Rubio gets his bill attached to something that will pass, we might end up with congressional hearings out there in 2020, maybe 2021. This is before COVID, obviously.
Right.
And they said, you girls are the only 2 that have ever done statistics. You've done stuff Blue Book didn't do. And I said, okay. I said, are you prepared to testify before Congress if this happens? And we both said, yeah, although we were both defense contractors. So our attitude was, the trick was to get through your whole career without having to testify before Congress. You know? But we were, you know, we said, yeah, okay, we would come clean, do national. It's, gee whiz, I'm a gay transsexual lady, and gee whiz, I'm going to come out on national television, you know? So,
right.
Oh yeah. And then talk about UFOs on top of that. Yes. So we said, sure, we'd do it. So we were just getting ready to start working on the new book, the new book. Okay. And Linda and I got talking about it. And he says, wait a minute. Say we end up in front of Congress, and that some congressman or senator is going to be sitting up there thumbing through our book. Yeah. So we want to make sure he knows that women put that book together, because women are always sidetracked in science.
Right.
And I said, yeah, okay. And we got talking about it. And I said, sure. Let's make sure that we check to make sure our publisher could do it, and they could. So we decided to make the front cover of that 8.5 by 11 book bright fuchsia pink. You could flag in an aircraft with it. Okay. That's why great. It's called the Pink Book, because we wanted those senators to be up there flipping through a big pink book. People would know it was our book, you know.
That is great.
And that's why it's called the Pink Book.
Where do I get a copy of the Pink Book?
Actually, both of them are available, but the Pink Book is probably the more accurate of all of them.
Yeah, I want the Pink Book.
go to Amazon.com.
Yep.
go to the book search area, put in Cheryl, Cheryl, put in Costa, Costa UFO, and the 3 books will show up. You'll see the white book, which is the 2001 to 2015. You'll see the pink book, 2001 to 2020, and you'll see a book called the UFO Beat, which is also an 8.5 by 11 book.
I see the pink book. I'm getting it right now. Okay.
Right, and that's the book to get. And we rewrote in not only statistic charts and graphs and everything like that, we wrote about a 40-page paper in there. Okay, because we can tell you, people think UFO, the sightings, they're all driven by population.
Right.
It's driven by population. It's driven by season. It's driven by whether it's a wet culture, a dry culture. There's a lot of, it's what's the word I want to use? Weather.
Right.
Weather is a driver. And there was also time of day. We discovered that after the first book. We discovered that 80%, it was 68 to 75% of the sightings happened from 5:30 in the afternoon to about 11:30 at night, with 60% of it happening between 8:30 and 10:30 at night.
Why do you think that is?
Bedtime. Taking the dog for a walk, going out for that last smoke, going out for a last cigarette and walking the dog.
Huh.
And MUFON investigators backed me up on it. I asked them about this, and one of the I was at a MUFON conference.
It's not really about the availability of UFOs per se, but humans' ability to have time to notice.
Thank you. Thank you. This MUFON investigator, he was a senior investigator. He was teaching a class of new investigators, and I told him about this. And he says, whenever I search a month's worth of sighting reports, the text of it, he said, I do a search for smoke or dog.
Wow.
He said, these people are reliable observers because they know the lay of their neighborhood. Okay. And they're out there day in, day out. Okay. And if their dog stiffens up and starts growling at something, it's probably something weird like that.
All right. Let me give you some credit here. If you listen to my first few podcasts where I talk about, because I personally have never witnessed anything other than one time there was a storm out and I saw a bright blue or like aqua colored orb in the sky. And there's a storm. Mm-hmm. And the only reason I was out there was to walk the dog. And and it didn't disappear or take off or do anything radical. The storm consumed it. So I was left in wonder as opposed to anything else. Right. And I think that had to happen to me because that's when I was starting the podcast.
Well, we were just coming out with the book as we were going into lockdown in 2020.
Right.
And George Knapp had me on Coast to Coast talking about the new book. And we talked about the statistic of most of this stuff. 75% of the sightings are between supper and 11 o'clock at night, and most of it between 8:30 and 10:30, bedtime.
So human downtime.
Huh. Well, yeah, but there was a number of other things, people going out on their patio, things like this.
Right.
And he called me up a couple of days before that appearance, and he said, by the way, are you getting phone calls? The sightings are back. He said, they went in the toilet from 2014 down to 2017. The sightings went in the toilet. It was dropping 30% a year for those 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And everybody thought, oh my God, the ETs went home, and I kept telling everybody, I says, I was on podcasts and radio shows, and I says, no, it's a natural cycle. It cycles like this every 6 or 7 years. Trust me, it'll be back by 19 or 20. And nobody paying attention. Oh no, they went home. They lost their grants or something, or Space Force chasing them away,
They lost their grants. That's great.
and I was hearing all this stuff, and George called me up. This is about first week of March, just before we went into lockdown 2020.
Right.
And he says, is your phone ringing off the hook? Mine is. I said, no, but I'll check. So I took 2019 off because I knew they wouldn't be back for a while. I had other projects to work on.
I'm glad you observed that there's patterns. I find that a lot in everything, not just what we're speaking about. I think everything has patterns and purpose. So,
well, you'll love this then.
Go ahead.
Because I grabbed National UFO Reporting Center only then because I have to go through hoops to get MUFON's data. I grabbed their data right off their website for January and February. And I pulled the numbers in. And I already had a spreadsheet that I could pull it in and compare just the monthly amounts, right? And I called George back and I said, "Hey, George," I said, "this January and February, any indication, this is 2020. I said, this is going to be the best year since 2013 or 14. He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, January and February numbers are on par with what we had back during the peak of sightings." And he said, "Okay, keep me posted." So I got March data. And as we were going into lockdown, he got me on Coast to Coast AM, and I brought this up, and different fans emailed me and said, if we're going into this lockdown, this might be the perfect laboratory to test your idea about this whole thing of people having the availability, like in the evening, to see these things.
That's a good point.
If they're going to be home all the time, we should have a huge spike in visibility. Okay. And damned, by the time we got March and April data, by the time we got to May, we looked at the chart and they were off the chart.
Wow.
Okay, because people were home.
That.
And what did we do during lockdown? We either watched streaming TV, we all ate too much, and we all went out on the back deck and drank too much too. So
agreed. Agreed totally. That's a good valid point. And I'm guilty. I'll say it, I'm guilty. Even doing this podcast, eventually I'm going to do a documentary, which I'm going to be calling on you, by the way. Point me in the directions to these statistics. But that being said, I'm guilty too, man. I spent I'm not looking up enough. I'm not looking enough. I'm guilty. I have to say it. So I'm going to apply more of what I know now, hopefully, because I desperately want to see something. And like Travis Walton, I'm probably going to be one of those people that get injured. They have to take and fix, because I'm going to run right at it if I'm able to run at it. But I'm definitely gonna be more mindful of that in the future.
That or you'll wake up and you're all full of chips. Trust me. I've met people that have got the chips, and you walk them by. I used to be a ham radio operator. You're walking by the RF sensors; they spike on certain frequencies. It's crazy.
I guess I'm a weirdo. Like if an alien showed up right now in the house and he's like, "Look, I'd have to stop him. Like, let's stop. I don't care what you do. What do I get? You got all this technology. What do I get out of this?" Right? Like, I desperately want to learn more. Before we close, I want to one last time reiterate where your book can be found in the name, and I'm going to put it in description. What, the pink book here?
Hang on a minute.
Yep, good.
I accidentally pulled the plug on my headset.
That's okay. Yeah, I'll just mention your book again and where to find it, and if there's a website or anything you want to advertise.
Okay, well, right now the two books that I think would be of interest to your listeners, if they want to look at the statistics and the study we did, we tell you what the drivers are and what the influencers are. There's also influencers. Okay, influencers like Tom Conwell, somebody you should interview. He's another New York State researcher. He figured out that using my data from the first book, he figured out that they seem to haunt our brown fields, our dead coal mines, our dead oil fields, our polluted lakes and rivers, that type of thing. The ETs are extremely interested in our waste, okay, and our pollution. And we discovered that they're following our fault lines, our geological fault lines,
right, and
a bunch of things like this. We discovered a whole bunch of correlations. So the book, we talk about this in our book. Now, the pink book, you can go to Amazon and you go, like I said, you go to the book search area, put in Cheryl Costa, Cheryl with a C, Costa with a C, UFO, and both books will pop up. The one you want is the pink book. It's the latest data. If you want to read all my old columns, newspaper columns, there's like 238 of them, you can get by the UFO Beat. And that is a lot of history, because I have a lot of sighting reports that I talked about, old ones, new ones, all kinds of things like that. I interviewed a lot of people, and I got a lot of good information. It was a lot of fun being a UFO journalist, and if the newspaper hadn't gone out of business, I'd still be doing it. It was the hottest column in the newspaper. Cheryl, it was funny.
I got to tell you, like, I'm looking forward to the book because you have a wealth of information. I'm glad I had you on for starters.
Anytime.
Yeah,
My
we're
friend.
definitely gonna do this again. Cheryl, it's been great. We are definitely doing this again. Hang along.
It's been fun.
And everyone listening, I'm sorry, but Cheryl and I are going to talk post podcast. Good night, everyone.